Okay, you guys, so I'm back recording, having put the front triple tree onto the frame stem and made all the adjustments. Got the front forks on, the front tubes, the fork covers here that we talked about in the last video. The handlebar clamps, both the upper and the lower. So I thought I would, I'll go over and give some explanation to what I did here. So obviously the first thing that had to happen was I had to install the triple tree, which meant putting this lower half of the triple tree here up into the fork stem, and then using the stem nut, which I like to call the spanner nut because it has those grooves in the side. The stem nut, which is underneath right about here, use the stem nut to preload the bearings that we showed off. So there's a cup bearing here and a cup bearing down below here in the triple tree. And so you use the stem nut to preload how much pressure you put on those bearings. And the manual actually doesn't give you any guidance except it says to preload them. But I think common sense is always our best tool to guide us towards tightening and loosening during assembly. So I preloaded it what appeared to be reasonable, which I don't think is really hard to figure out. And then I was able to install one at a time, actually install the forks themselves. I did the right side. One thing that I've made the mistake on a couple times here is you need to make sure you put the fork cover on here, the cowbells or the beer can. You need to make sure you put that onto the lower part of the triple tree first, because I made the mistake of actually installing the fork tubes and forgot about these. So these go on first, which it does say in the manual. And then the fork tubes just, they slide up quite nicely all the way through it, all the way up to the top of the triple tree where the cap bolts go. These guys here. And I was careful to make sure that there was no gap here, that I had them raised up all the way while I tighten that, because you don't want a gap there. The other thing that's important is there's a flat spot which we can't see inside here. This is a 5/16 fine thread that actually bolts through the headlight nacelle and locks against the flat spot that's in this fork tube in there. So you need to make sure that flat spot is referenced parallel with the inside of this hole here. And the manual didn't say it, but again, common sense. What I figured out was I just put the axle through, and by doing that, it actually held the left and right fork totally relative and parallel to each other, exactly as they should be, because the axle held them in that position. Same thing up here with the handlebar upper clamp. The top part of the clamp, which is this, of course the handlebar is not installed yet, and the lower part of the clamp. So you can't tighten these clamp nuts here, these lower clamp nuts, until you actually put the cover on, or you'd run the possibility of it spinning or twisting. So by putting the cover on the top, the handlebar cover on the top clamp, it holds everything as it should be while you put the proper torque value on these handlebar riser nuts. So there's also an important torque value for the cap nuts. There are, as we know, or maybe don't know, there is a bolt here, which is the clamp. So the lower part of your triple tree, there's actually a hex head nut on the back side here, which that hex head nut also has a specific torque value, and this lower part acts as a clamp which specifically hugs the fork on the left and the right. So all very precision, all in the manual. By the way, I take notes to myself. So I open the manual up and I leave it open to the page that shows the torque values and other important and pertinent information. And I also take notes to myself. So I have 2 or 3 pages of quick notes that I took. A lot of times just about what millimeter something might be, or what wrench size you should be using, or specifically what page of either the service manual or the parts catalog. So you need to have parts catalog for an 02, 03 Power Plus Chief, and you need to have the service manual. And you know, they're our Bible, they're our library of what needs to be done. Sort of just walking around here and showing off that the front end is installed and is complete, somewhat. So give me a minute here and I'll go over some of these torque values with you. So specifically the crown nut, which is the big nut up in the back here, it's an 1.5 inch nut. Specifically that nut is 45 to 50 foot-pounds, which is in the manual. The pinch bolts that are down here in the lower part of the triple tree, specifically those pinch bolts are 25 to 30 foot-pounds. Remember, I encourage you to read the manual. The stem nut or the spanner nut, you don't make a final adjustment on that until you have the weight of the fender and the wheel, of course, and the headlight and the cell. The only thing you don't want to have hooked up are your cables, because you have to do what's called a fall-away test. That's how you set the proper tension or torque on the bearings with the stem nut. We'll go over that fall-away test in just a minute. The cap bolts, these come in at 18 to 20 foot-pounds. The handlebar riser nuts, really a pretty high torque value, but specifically these here came in at 75 foot-pounds. Now, remember, I have all new hardware. I have all new rubber grommets inside that lower handlebar clamp, new metal spacer, all brand new parts. Or, as I said in our opening video, they are re-chromed, refurbished, or possibly re-powder coated. So I think I covered what would be pertinent. Again, important to have the front axle in. Important also, as you can imagine, putting 75 foot-pounds of torque on these nuts. If I did not have the cover on this top clamp, that would spin, right? And then it wouldn't stay in the proper aligned position for when you actually are installing your handlebars for the first time. You know, again, lots of stuff that's not in the manual, lots of stuff that I guess it's just common sense, I think. You know, it's very interesting, having worked on these Power Plus bikes for around 10 years now, and certainly doing about every application you could do, except for rebuilding my own engines and taking my own transmissions apart, and painting my own motorcycle. You know, beyond that, I think I've fairly well done everything multiple times, but it's an interesting process. It's an interesting concept to be doing this from the ground up, brand new, from the start. And I suppose I'm being extra careful, not that I'm not always extra careful, but specifically I'm trying to do it as if I was a technician in the Gilroy factory. And I'm noticing how slow that I've convinced myself to go. I said in the last video that I spent a while doing research on the right tools to have. So let's talk about this fall-away test. which I think, you know, is really a wide open subject. I've watched a lot of videos on YouTube about the fall-away test. On Kawasaki's, on Harley Davidson's. Specifically, I didn't see one on a Gilroy Chief. And so we're going to, I guess, add some information or some conversation to how I approach this fall-away test. So the idea, you know, if you guys will be patient with me, I'm going to come over to this completed O2 bike here. So the idea of the fall-away test is that specifically as we move the front end a little to the right, it should have a predetermined distance that it falls away, hence the fall-away test. Duh. So to the left, we can see also we reach a fallover point or a break point. So the manual calls for 4 to 6 inches off dead center. Now dead center would be the center of the chief head as you had it relative to a chair that you put here with a piece of masking tape. So think of the hands on a clock as 12 o'clock. And so the 4 to 6 inches specifically would be a distance of travel to the right. Okay, now that was probably around, that was right at the 4-inch area where that did a fall away. And now if I come to the left over here, now keep in mind the cables are on the bike, the clutch cable, the throttle cables, so they're actually giving some friction to this. And you know, you're supposed to do this fall-away test per the Indian manual, which was quite contradictory to the Kawasaki and the Harley Davidson, but the Indian manual specifically wanted you to have everything installed on the bike, which I thought was sort of counterintuitive, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So anyway, the fall-away test to the left here seems to fall right about at that 6-inch area. So this is from the factory. And I suppose we would say that it fell within specs on the fall-away test. And again, I think it's common sense how the handlebars feel to turn. And I think to the person setting up the preload on the bearings the first time, which I did on our bike that we're rebuilding, I think that person is most responsible for putting enough preload pressure on the bearings in the triple tree as they have friction against the fork tube in the front. So, you know, in contradiction a little bit to the Indian manual, I said there's no reason I shouldn't preload this without the fender in an intelligent way. So as you can see, I leveled the frame, because it seems to me that that's very important that the bike is leveled, just being a mechanic assembling elevators. Why would something that you're testing as you turned it be a good test if it wasn't level or plumb to start? So I leveled it with a couple of wedges under my pit bull lift here, and it seemed to me that made much more common sense. So after I had it level, you know, I don't have a chair here with any masking tape. I certainly didn't think it was necessary. I set my eyes on this center bolt here, and then also it was pretty easy for me to set my point of reference as the center of the axle. And so I believe I have this set pretty well. So as I turn to the right a little bit, there is its fallover point, which seemed to be a bit, but I am 1,000% sure when the weight of the fender and the handlebars on there, the breakaway is going to fall into that 4 to 6 inch area. And then here we go to the left, and it seemed to be about equal, you guys, and I suspect it's because I leveled it. So I actually checked all my other bikes too, and they all seem to have, you know, because the cables are hooked up, they all seem to specifically have about what that O2 Chief that I'm showing you now had, which, by the way, I inherited since our very first 2 videos. And so now the grand total of Indian Chiefs that your friend on YouTube has is 7. Yeah, 7. So we're rebuilding number 6. And I suppose around this time next year, while number 6 is blazing around the beautiful countryside here in the wonderful area that we live in Connecticut, this guy right here is going to be going through his rebuild. Now, specifically think about the time I've saved by creating a layout or a visual blueprint with all my specific notes. So, you know, think how cozy that's going to be doing that. And I never have any lack of enthusiasm for working on these. So now, as I kept it a secret what color we're going to be painting this wonderful 03 Chief, I'm going to keep it a secret about the 02. I've got a color that came from a restored 1933 Chief, which is freaking drop dead gorgeous. It's a multicolor Chief with gold pinstriping, which is always where it's at for me. So anyway, next year's project, boys and girls. So I think I'm about done explaining this. Where is that tool I used? So I did specific research on looking for the Indian motorcycle, which was priority specific to Indian of Gilroy, to adjust this spanner nut, as I call it up in here, or the stem nut. So since I could not find one, since it's really not a true spanner wrench, I settled on one of these drift pin punches, which are tapered. And I adjusted it and ground it to where it fits, oh, so sexy and so nice up in here, that with just the slightest tap of a ball peen hammer, either to tighten or to loosen, and it doesn't get in the way of anything on the bike, even if the gas tank was on. So, you know, like we all do when we can't find the tool, I sort of created a tool, or I repurposed a tapered punch to serve that specific task of tightening that stem nut. And again, it's where I spent my time, you guys, researching this fall-away business, how much pre-torque on the bearings in the triple tree as friction is created between them and the stem and the fork stem. So I think I'm good. And so what's missing here, what I need to continue is I'm going to install the front wheel on this axle, not the wheel that'll stay on the bike. It's easy to change a front or rear wheel. Just for the purpose of being able to roll it around, I'm going to use one of my older used wheels. I'm going to stick a handlebar up here, and then the front end of the bike will be ready to be it's participating part of a moving chassis or a rolling frame. What I think I will work on next, which is common sense, I believe, not coming out of the manual, just coming out of what makes sense to me, is the swing arm and a rear wheel, the rear axle. Now, to install the swing arm, I'm going to have to put a new belt on, a new upgraded belt, different than the stock belt that came, which had some chirping problems. We'll talk about that when we get to it. So rear wheel is next, kickstand, set of handlebars, and we're going to have a rolling frame. So to be continued in the next episode or two. So a little talk, just a minute of chatter about why I'm not going to put the finished wheel on here. The reason is because I actually dismantle or unlace all of my own wheels, and you can too. And so, you know, you put the spokes in a box and the hub in a box, and it all comes apart very easily, and you send it off to whoever your local chrome shop is, or a person that you trust. And for me, as you'll see on our Chiefs as we continue, I have powder-coated rims and chromed hubs and chromed spokes. And you guys, it makes all the difference in the world between what's a classic looking top shelf motorcycle and sort of just stock. And you guys with Gilroy Chiefs will know that these rims were chromed, not in the USA, most of them. And so if you're in any sort of a damp area, I know Florida's bad on these rims, you know, they start to pit and corrode pretty quick. So, you know, I've heard of guys who will go through the trouble of unlacing the rim and then having it relaced and only chroming the hub and not chroming the spokes. And you know, the wheel lacer guy that I use, I've been in his shop more than one time, and he'll have a customer on the phone and he'll be telling that customer, you know, it's your choice. There's really no difference between just polishing the stainless steel and having them chromed. And I've heard him explain that the stainless steel is just as good as the chrome as long as you keep it polished. Well, boy, that's just silly to me. You got these things apart. There is a huge difference. There's no comparison between chrome spokes and polished stainless spokes, which are a temporary state of being. So if you've got them apart, get them chromed, you guys. Anyway, that's it for now. I probably will end this video with a little sort of a run through on another one of our restored Chiefs. And so I'll catch up with you in a few minutes in the center bay of the barn that I'm working in here. And we'll go do a quick walk around of one of my restored 03 Chiefs. Hey, as always, thanks for being with me here. See you soon.